Hello, everyone. Welcome to Owls of Maine. We are at the Maine Wildlife Park today, but before we jump into it, I want to remind you that you can use the chat feature on the side and send us questions or comments. Let us know where you're watching from, and we'll try and address all the questions at the end. Laura is going to be helping from the office today, so she'll be playing some sounds for us and helping answer questions as well. But I'm here at the Maine Wildlife Park. My name is Jade. I'm an educator for inland fisheries and wildlife. And here at the Wildlife Park in Gray, we have over 30 different species of native Maine wildlife that can't live in the wild on their own anymore. So they live here at the park and help us teach people about all the different wildlife that's here in Maine. But today, we are looking specifically at owls. Owls are almost as iconic to Halloween as bats and spiders. And some people think they're a little bit spooky. Owls are seen as being kind of scary because of the sounds that they make at night, because they fly almost silently, because they have those big eyes that can watch you. But truthfully, unless you're a little mouse or another rodent living down on the ground, you don't need to be afraid of owls. Owls are incredible animals, and all of those things that make them seem a little scary to people are part of what makes them really good at being nocturnal animals and helping catch their little rodent prey. So their hooting and funky noises at night is just how they talk, and their silent flight and their big eyes is just how they survive. So it's nothing to be afraid of, and hopefully today, as we take a closer look at some of these owls, you'll learn to not be afraid of them and to love them as much as we do. So owls are raptors, and raptors, which we also sometimes call birds of prey, have a few characteristics in common. We'll look specifically at owl adaptations too, but a lot of them cross over with raptors. So raptors are carnivores. They eat meat. They don't eat plants. And it's different for all of them. Some of them eat small mammals and fish and insects and everything. And owls tend to eat smaller rodents. But raptors can eat a wide range of things, even carrion, which are animals that they scavenge that have already been killed by something else. So varied diet, but they all eat meat. They're all carnivores. We're going to take a look at a great horned owl mount here. So this great horned owl is not alive anymore, but it helps us look at some of those amazing adaptations that owls and other raptors have. One of the first ones I want to look at are these big eyes I was talking about earlier. A lot of them have really big eyes for helping them see their prey from really far away. Owls have amazing vision. They also have very good hearing. So great horned owls have extra feathers on top of their heads. That's how they get that name, which we'll talk about more later. But their ears are actually closer to their heads. They're on the sides of their heads. And owls have amazing ability to hear. They also have these big wings and very special feathers. Their feathers are frayed on the ends. And with those frayed feathers, it makes it so their flight is very, very quiet. I'll do a demonstration in a minute here to show you how you can test how quiet owl feathers are. We can also look at these sharp talons here and this very sharp hooked beak. I'm gonna turn them to the side so you can see that sharp hooked beak and those really sharp talons. Those are also gonna help them catch their prey and eat their prey. And also, if you look at their feathers, they're the color of nature. They're the color of their habitats. So it helps them blend in. It gives them camouflage, which helps them when they're up in the trees and they're looking down, trying to catch a little mouse. Here I have an owl skull. I was talking about their awesome eyesight. And when we look at this owl skull, we see that they have very unique structure here around their eyes. So humans, we can move our eyes side to side and up and down without moving our heads. But owls can't do that. They can't move their eyes around like we can because of these bones that wrap around their eyes. So instead of moving their eyes around, owls have a really cool adaptation that you've probably heard of, that instead they turn their whole head around. People can't look very far over their shoulders, but an owl, instead of moving their eyes to look, moves their whole head and can turn their heads really far. Some owls can rotate their heads around up to 270 degrees. So they can't really spin it in a full circle. They're not that flexible, but it's a lot more flexible than we are. Because in our neck, we have all of our like blood, our arteries and everything, and nerves that run up in our neck. And they do too, but their necks are a lot more flexible because they actually have extra vertebrae. So if you feel on the back of your neck, all those little bones that you can feel that go from your back up to your head, they have extra bones there so that they can be really, really flexible and look all the way around. You can also take a closer look at that hooked beak for catching little mice and rats and rodents. And again, that fancy eye structure. Because owls have what we call tubular vision, which means their eyes kind of work like a telescope, which is really cool. They can see things from really, really far away. So our eyes, even though they can move around and we can look around like that, we can't use our eyes like a telescope. So owls have amazing eyesight and that ability to turn their heads all the way around. And once they see that prey, they have to catch the prey. And rodents have big ears and really good ability to hear. So owls have adapted to have what we often call silent flight. So I have this long rope here, and at one end of the rope, there's nothing on it. And on the other end of the rope, I've tied a bunch of yarn, little strings of yarn. And this yarn represents the frayed feathers on the owl's feathers. So if I swing this around, I'm going to be really quiet and we'll see if we can hear the difference between these. But I definitely suggest doing this at home so you can hear it up close for yourself. So first I'm going to spin the end with no special owl feathers on it. So it makes that whooshing noise. It's going whoosh, whoosh, whoosh as I spin it around. And then this end, with our fancy yarn that represents the owl feathers, we'll spin that one next. So it might be a little tricky because we're doing it through a microphone and not here in person, but that was really, really quiet. This end made that loud whooshing noise, and this end was almost silent. So it's a good way of trying to test for yourself how those owl feathers work to make them fly so quietly. There's also some peacocks across from me, so they probably were interrupting some of that owl sound too. Maybe we'll look at our peacocks before we walk to the next owl. But before we go too far, I want to take a closer look at the owl that's right here behind me. This is our barn owl here at the wildlife park. And just about every owl that we'll look at today, just like our other raptors, they can't live in the wild on their own. Most of them have wing injuries that makes it so that they can't fly. And some of them also have head and eye injuries that makes it much more difficult for them to see, hear, and even migrate for some of these migratory species. So they can't do all those things that they would need to do in the wild to catch their prey and move from place to place. We'll take a closer look at this barn owl. I'm going to move the camera a little bit.
So you guys were just hearing the barn owl call, which sounds a little bit like a screech of like a ghost or something. And that's why sometimes people be very scared of these as they flew out of the barn making that noise, that loud scream.
So hopefully you can get a better look at the barn owl here. And again, that sound is kind of scary to us, But to the barn owl, it's just like us talking to each other. That's just how they talk to each other. Just sounds a lot different than we do. But it's really nothing to be afraid of. And she is really beautiful. Want to point out, if you can see the kind of heart-shaped feathers around her face, we call that a facial disc. And a lot of owls, most owls, the feathers around their face kind of point towards the sides of their heads and make a circle around their face like a disc. And that helps the sound go closer to their ears. So the barn owl is a really good example of this because you can see that shape very well around their face. And again, that's for just sending sound closer to the ears on the sides of their head so they can hear even better. All right, I'm going to take us for a walk to go see our next owl. I'll stop and show us these noisy peacocks because I'm sure you've been able to hear them a little bit. But they've been right across from us and they are just honking away. So that funky honking sound are the peacocks. All right, let's go see the barred owl.
So the barred owl is one of our other really common birds in the area, one you might see during the day. And you can see here at allaboutbirds.org, we can see what they look like. And they're also one you often hear. Sometimes it sounds like a dog barking, but their more common sounds like they're saying, "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" So we'll take a listen real quick while Jade goes and gets set up at the next owl. So let's see if you can hear that phrase in there. So you can hear that pattern in there. We obviously put those words, but this is them talking to each other or telling other owls to stay away. This is their territory. And they sometimes also make really loud, almost like monkey calls at times when the pair are talking to each other across a forest. Oh, there's the owl.
So the barred owl is in the back corner here. Oh, just made a little clicky sound at us too. But one of their distinguishing characteristics are their big, dark eyes. Most owls have much lighter colored eyes, even kind of yellowish eyes. And the barred owl has big, dark eyes. And again, you might be able to see a little bit, but again, that facial disc of feathers that goes around her whole face to help send sound to her ears. Really beautiful. And their names, again, the barn owl and the barred owl, sound kind of similar, but they're different. They live in different areas and they behave differently and look differently. So one is the barn owl and one is the barred owl.
Yep. And that clicking noise that they make, they do have a lot of different other communications. The calls we typically hear are their territory calls saying, "This is my area." They're claiming it. They also do all sorts of different kind of clicks and different noises. Some mean stay away, some are endearing, that's how they kind of communicate with each other as well. So the loud hoots are ones that we usually hear them echoing across the forest, claiming their land as their own.
And this barred owl is one of the newest raptors here at the wildlife park. She just arrived here a couple weeks ago. So she's still getting settled in and still getting used to people. But she's settling in nicely here. We're going to go see the great horned owl next.
All right, so here we're looking at a nice image of an adult and a young great horned owl here on All About Birds. And we are going to just listen to their call. They're very quiet, so listen closely. They're a very deep, "Who's awake? Me too," kind of tone. And so let's just listen to that. I'll let it go again. I'll listen to it one more time. So you can hear that right in there. And if you want to learn more about these species. The Cornell Lab of Ornithology has a great website called allaboutbirds.org, and I highly recommend checking it out. Again, they have lots of other calls. Sometimes in the late spring, people will sometimes hear the young in the springtime making really loud screeching calls. It's their hunger calls for their parents, as I'm sure any parents are aware of. But this is one of our largest owls in the state. And there they are.
So there's two great horned owls here at the wildlife park. On them, you can see their more brightly colored eyes stand out a little bit against their faces, but their feathers really help them blend in. They spend a lot of time up in the trees, so they have really pretty camouflaged feathers for helping them blend in the trees. And of course, those feathers on their heads are not actually horns. They're feathers, but they look a lot like horns up on top of their heads, so they get called the great horned owl. And these two both have some eye injuries, so they can't see as well as a wild owl would, and they need that eyesight to be able to catch those little tiny prey down on the ground from up high in the trees. So they live here where we can bring their tasty mice right to them. And speaking of tasty mice, we're going to look at some owl digestion, and what comes out of owl digestion is pretty unique to raptors.
So while Jade goes and gets set up, I just want to show you all this image here of the this is actually a drawing of a barn owl that you can see. And owls typically swallow their prey whole, or sometimes they'll take off large bites, but they're eating all the fur and the bones, or if it's a bug, they're eating the exoskeleton too, and all goes into their digestive system. It goes into that stomach, and their acids and their enzymes in their stomach help to break down that food so they can get the meat and all the yummy stuff out of their prey. But not every part is digestible by the bird. So as they eat and get that food and it works through their system, through their intestines, all the meat and yummy stuff goes through, gives them energy. But then they're left with this fur and bones. And so periodically, usually somewhere around 8 to 12 hours after they've eaten a meal, they're going to cough up what looks almost like a fur ball, but it's a compacted little ball of fur and bones, and it's the undigestible material that these owls can't eat, and we call it an owl pellet. It isn't puke because it's not parts of their undigested food, and it's not poop because it's not coming out the other end. It's not the waste from the food that they've eaten. And in this diagram, you can see how it makes a difference. You can see it coughing up the pellet of bones and fur, and the food goes through the digestive system, and then of course it poops just like the rest of us. So Jade's going to show us what that pellet is, the part that comes out the mouth around 12 hours after they eat that fur and bones.
Yes, I'd like to first state that I am wearing gloves because these pellets can have bacteria and germs on them that you don't want to have close to like your face, mouth, anything like that. So if you ever are doing this yourself, wear some protective gloves and make sure you keep that pellet away from your face. So this is one of the barn owl pellets. And if I hold it up a little bit closer, you can actually see little bits of fur and maybe even some bone here. And as you get even deeper into this pellet, you're going to find all kinds of things. It's kind of like solving a mystery of what that owl ate. It's really, really fun to do. It does take a little bit of time. Took me probably about, 15, 20 minutes to get some bones. So I'm going to show you some of the bones I found yesterday in one of these barn owl pellets. We'll see if we can get a little bit closer here to really get a good look at some of these bones. And I have a small, fairly inexpensive dissection kit, but you can also just, of course, go to any drugstore or anything, get some tweezers to pick these apart with. And there's all kinds of little bones. This was from one single owl pellet. And once I started looking at the different jaw bones and little skull bones and hip bones and everything, shoulder bones, I was able to figure out that there were about 2 mice in this one owl pellet. And right next to this, we have a bone diagram. This is from a teaching resource, but there's all kinds of them you can find online. And it can help you figure out exactly which bones and from what species those bones are inside of your pellet. It gives you some of the most common prey species that an owl would eat, and then gives you all the different shapes of bones that you could find inside that pellet to help you solve that mystery. So I can like grab a bone and kind of compare and see, oh, is this a leg bone? Is this, what species is this from? And of course, these are from a bird that's here at the wildlife park. So we know exactly what the owls here eat because we are the ones that provide them their food. But out in the wild, it's much more of a mystery. They might have eaten a mouse, a shrew, a mole, a small bird, sometimes even a frog. You might be able to find a worksheet that has some frog bones on it. So this is one way you can help solve a mystery of what an owl ate based on these really cool pellets that they cough up because they can't digest the bone and fur from these prey that they catch and eat. I'm gonna spin this back around and we'll go look back at our great horned owl while we take some questions. But I also wanted to talk really quickly about some owl conservation. All the raptors in Maine are managed and tracked, and we try and keep track of their populations and everything. Our wildlife biologists work with other different organizations in the state to keep track of them. Most of our raptor populations are doing a lot better. Eagles, bald eagles are one of the greatest success stories because we had eagles on the endangered species list and they're now off the endangered species list, which is very exciting. But that doesn't mean that there aren't still things that we can be doing all the time to try and help birds of prey. The biggest thing is, of course, you cannot, it is illegal to kill any birds of prey. So never do anything intentionally to harm a raptor, an owl, a hawk, an eagle, because that is illegal. So definitely don't do anything to kill them or hurt them. But also protecting their habitat. The more we know about these birds, the better we can help conserve their habitats and make sure that there's plenty of spaces for them to live and find their prey. We know that barn owls like more agricultural land and grassland and open spaces, but also having forested areas that have plenty of protected habitat for all of these species. And you can find out more at mefishwildlife.com and look at all these different species of raptors and some of the different things that the department can do to help protect these birds. So again, that's mefishwildlife.com. I would love to answer any questions that people have along the way, and Laura can help me answer questions too. And send in more questions if you haven't yet.
Yes, so we do have some questions that came in. Someone was wondering, do any other raptors other than owls, so like our hawks and our, falcons, eagles, vultures, do any of those birds also make pellets?
Yes, great question. So other raptors do make pellets. They have very similar digestion to owls, so they don't digest the bones and fur as well. Some of our owl species, it's a little bit easier to find their pellets. They tend to roost in places that we might actually be able to find them, like in barns and things like that. But eagles also make pellets, but they can be a little bit harder to find. So other raptor species do have pellets, and some of them are pretty large. Like an eagle pellet is large because they're eating larger prey and they're a larger bird of prey. But yeah, other raptor species do also form a pellet.
All right, so we do have a few others. Someone was wondering, can you call in owls? Like you can call to other creatures sometimes. And we talked a little bit about this in the chat. But one of the things we want to remind people is owls are species that are protected. And so we want to be cautious about how much we're doing to call them in, but they do respond to calls. They, especially during the mating season, but again, we don't want to stress them out if they're raising young or hunting. So just want to put that out there. But yeah, okay, another question. Good. These are great, guys. Keep the questions coming in for Jade and I, and we'll happily answer them. Someone asked, what do owls eat? Mentioned it a little, but could you add a little bit more about what do owls eat?
Yeah, so most owls eat small rodents. So they're going to eat mice, moles, voles, even rats, some of the larger owls. They'll even catch small birds and eat smaller birds. Owls like the great horned owl, they're one of the larger owl species. They've been known to pick up even like a skunk or like a small mammal that's much larger than a mouse. So sometimes they'll take a little bit bigger prey, but most of the owls eat small rodents like mice and moles and voles and shrews.
All right. Another question was about how long do owls tend to live?
Yeah, so that's going to vary quite a bit. A lot of birds can live a long time. We have some pretty old raptors here at the wildlife park, but again, they're living in captivity, so they get very specialized care and attention. They get veterinary care when they need it. In the wild, they probably wouldn't live quite as long. So we have some raptors here that are over 25, 30 years old, but in the wild, they might live a little bit less long. So they might live more between 15, 20, 25 years. But that's still a really long time for an animal in the wild. A lot of animals don't live that long, but birds tend to live pretty long lives.
Yeah, and some in captivity, like we said, can live pretty long, like 35 years or so, but that's where they get special care. Let's see. So someone, they missed it, but could you say again, where did your great horned owl come from?
I'm not sure where they came from. They did come from a rehabilitation center. I'm not sure exactly which one, but they were both gone to a rehabilitation center, wildlife rehabber, where they will try and address their injuries and assess them and everything. And best case scenario, a lot of animals that go to rehabilitation centers get released and get to live out their lives in the wild. But these two, because they had eye and head injuries, they can't hunt on their own. They can't find their own prey. So they live here because they have those long-term health problems, those vision impairments.
And then you showed us several really wonderful owl species today, the great horned owl, the barred owl, and the barn owl. What other species are there? Like about how many in Maine? Because it's more than just those three, of course. So about how many species are there in Maine? I know it can change from season to season.
Yeah, so like Laura said, it does change season to season. Some owls are here more in the winter, some are here more in the warmer months, depending on their breeding and as they're migrating. But it's around 8 to 9 species in total that we have here in Maine. So again, the barn, the barred, the great horn. We also have saw-whet and long-eared and short-eared owls, and the great gray owl sometimes, and snowy owls. So we have a few different species, but again, it's different seasons. They will come and go, and some are in the state closer to year round, and some are here for shorter periods of time.
And someone was wondering, do you know how many young or the chicks does an owl have at once?
So again, it's probably going to depend a little bit species to species, but for the most part, between 2 to 3 or 4 eggs at a time. And most of the time, all those owlets don't survive to adulthood, so they have several, so that hopefully at least one survives to be an adult owl.
Someone had a very fun question about their territory size, and they're wondering how large an owl's territory can be. And that's going to really vary based off of if it's the mating season, if they're on their own, because a pair will come together a lot during the mating season and then separate out a little bit outside of that. So, and also depending on the species, smaller species tend to have a smaller territory across the land that they'll patrol and hunt in for their food. And so it's anywhere from, like, say, about a third or so square mile to 2 to 5 square miles, depending on the time of year or the species. Obviously, larger species need more land to support their diet, but that's a really great question. It can definitely vary. So someone was wondering, if you have smaller pets, like a cat or a little dog, should you not leave them unattended if you know you have a larger species like great horned owl in your area?
Yeah, really good question. So that's something that brings up not just owls, but other predator species as well. We always suggest keeping, especially your smaller pets, close to home and leashed. You don't need to just worry about owls, but there's other predator species that are out there. So I would always recommend keeping your pets close to home and keeping them leashed, especially if you're not there to keep an eye on them. You want to have them close to you. But in general, most owls are not going to harm your small pets. Some of our larger species, like the great horned, I said, can catch prey like the size of a skunk. But in general, they're usually eating much smaller prey, and they're not going to usually go after household pets.
As long as you're out there with them, they should be safe. And it is a good idea to keep a lot of your different animals like house cats inside, because not only could they accidentally fall victim to a predator. I mean, Maine has a lot of wild places, so there are predators, like Jade said, but also cats, when they're outdoors, can prey on other smaller animals, even if they don't need to, since they're being fed indoors, and they can cause harm to other wildlife populations like songbirds. So we've got a few more questions, and we'll take a few more. And if we don't get to your question, I apologize, but we're going to get to a few more here. We have a great question about owls and their nests. Do owls make nests, or what different kinds of nests do owls have?
Yeah, great question. And again, this is going to vary from species to species. Some smaller species of owl, like the screech owl, will nest in cavities in trees and in small spaces in the trees. But owls like the great horned owl, they're going to form sort of like more of a makeshift kind of nest.
Yeah, and they often steal one too. They'll often find old crow nests or osprey or heron nests, because they don't really make a big nest. They kind of just find one and make it work.
Yeah. So most of the owls aren't nest building intricate nests like some of our songbirds and these really beautiful bird nests. But they'll use trees and different cavities in barns and trees and things like that to rest and roost in. But none of them make nests quite as nice as some other bird species.
And someone was wondering, do we have the small northern saw-whet owl in Maine?
So I believe we do. That Laura might know better for me than that.
We do.
But I don't think that they're here year round.
No, so sometimes they'll say a little bit year round. Populations, sometimes depending on how the winter is, they might be able to stay, but saw-whets are also known as a migratory owl. They will pass through in the fall and go further south, but we do get the northern saw-whet here, so you could definitely hear them in the breeding season and through the summer. They have a little like beeping sound that they make, sounds like a truck backing up, or originally like a saw on a whetstone, a sharpening stone, which is how they got their name, saw-whet owl. But yes, we do get the northern saw-whet owl here in Maine. So they're adorable and little, but you should still leave them alone because they still have talons and beaks. Yeah, so one more question here. So for the owls that you guys have, they're all injured, and something's happened, so that's why they can't go back into the wild. People reported them, they went to rehabilitators, they couldn't be fixed, unfortunately. So if you were to come across an injured owl, how could you catch one, or should you catch one? What should you do if you come across an injured owl, say in the road or in your yard or someplace?
Yeah, so one of the bird rehabilitation centers that's really excellent here in Maine is called Avian Haven. We direct a lot of our calls and requests when people have found any kind of injured bird, especially raptors, to Avian Haven. And I always suggest calling before you intervene. Having a professional who works with those species give you advice and let you know what's best to do is always the best route. So I would, before you intervene, give a call. Usually we suggest like using a large box or something to put over the bird, and it gives them a dark space to kind of try and relax. And a lot of times birds don't really have an injury, but sometimes they just got a little shaken. And sort of like when we're nervous, it's like that adrenaline rush and you kind of freeze up and you think you're hurt, you're not really sure. But I always suggest calling one of the bird rehabilitation centers because they work with those species every day, all the time. And they can give you the best advice on your specific situation because it's going to be very different for every situation.
Yeah, no, that's really great advice. Always call before and always make sure you're safe as well. That's very important. So lots of really great information here today, Jade. Thank you so much for sharing. That seems to be the end of our questions right now. But of course, if you have more questions, you can call us. You can send us an email, send us a message on Facebook, and we'll do our best to get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for joining us today. I hope today you've learned that owls are less spooky, less scary than you might have first thought that they were. They are still an awesome symbol of Halloween, which is coming right up. But hopefully you know now that owls are very cool and have amazing adaptations and they're not so spooky. If you do have any other questions, you can always share them with us. You can learn more about inland fisheries and wildlife at mefishwildlife.com. And you can learn more about the wildlife park at mainewildlifepark.com. And we have some other videos coming up in the future that you can check out on our website, and always check YouTube for other videos. Again, that's Emmy Fish Wildlife for our YouTube.